the night Harlan Whitmore stood at the head of the table and raised his glass to toast the greatest deal his family had ever made. His daughter-in-law was the one who had written the contract. He didn't know that, neither did his son. Marie Fontaine Cross, 37-year-old wife of Becket Cross, sat at the far end of the table in a dress the color of deep burgundy, her hands folded in her lap, her expression the kind of calm that takes years to build, the kind that doesn't come from peace, the kind that comes from deciding, very quietly, that you are done. The dinner was at Harlan's estate in Buckhead, Atlanta, a Thursday in October. The trees outside had gone gold and rust, and someone had lit candles in every window of the main hall, the way Harlan liked for important occasions. He had declared this one important. A celebration, he'd said in the group text that morning. Come at 7, dress well. Mireille had driven herself. She sat between Harlan's wife, Dorothea, and Beckett's younger sister, Faye, who spent most of the first course talking about a trip to Turks and Caicos she was planning with friends Mireille had never met. Beckett sat closer to his father, near the head of the table, laughing at things Mireille couldn't hear over the length of the room. That was how it had been for a long time now. Beckett closer to his father, Mireille farther from everything. She sipped her water. She did not drink wine at dinners like this anymore. She needed to be clear. Harlan Cross, 64-year-old patriarch and former commercial real estate developer, stood when the entrees were cleared. He was a tall man, broad in the way of men who had once been athletic and now wore their age in the shoulders. He tapped his glass with a butter knife and the table went quiet. I want to say something, he began, the way men like Harlan always began, as though the room had been waiting for him specifically. This family has worked for 40 years to build something, brick by brick, deal by deal. And I want everyone here tonight to understand what it means that we are now in partnership with the Voss Group. He said the name the way people say the name of a cathedral, with a slight pause before and after, letting it stand on its own. Marie set her water glass down very carefully. The Voss Group, Harlan continued, is the most respected privately held investment firm in the Southeast, 32 years in operation. They do not take on partners lightly. They have turned down people I respect, and they said yes to us. He looked at Beckett. To this family. Beckett smiled the way he smiled in photos. Wide easy, built for rooms like this. I have been trying to get a seat at that table for 11 years, Harlan said. 11 years of calls, of proposals, of lunches with people who looked at me like I was a footnote. And this year, finally, they came to us. Because of the Meridian portfolio. Because of what Beckett has been building. He raised his glass. To the Cross family, to what we've earned. Everyone raised their glasses. Mireille did not raise hers. No one noticed. She had founded the Voss Group when she was 29 years old, not under her name. That had been intentional. She had learned early that her name, on certain documents, in certain rooms, invited a particular kind of skepticism that wasted everyone's time. So the firm was structured under a holding company, and the holding company was registered under a name that meant nothing to anyone who didn't already know. And the people who ran the day-to-day operations were people she had chosen carefully over 8 years for their competence and their discretion. She had met Beckett at 31, 2 years after the firm had its first major close. He had been charming in the way of men who have never been told no by anyone they found attractive. He asked for her number at a fundraiser in Midtown. She gave it to him because she was tired that night, and tired people sometimes make choices based on how easy something feels. He never asked what she did. She noticed that. She filed it away. She told him she worked in finance. He said that was great. He talked about the Cross family portfolio for most of the first dinner. She listened. She was good at listening. She had built a career on it. By the time they married, 3 years later, she had structured the firm so that her involvement was, to any outside observer, purely advisory. Her name appeared nowhere in the primary documents. This was not unusual in the world she operated in. Privacy was a feature, not a flaw. Beckett had never asked for more detail than she offered. She had told herself for a while that this was because he respected her boundaries. She understood now that it was because he had not been curious enough to ask. There is a difference. It matters. The marriage had been, for the first 2 years, something she could describe as good, not extraordinary, but functional, warm in the specific way of two people who are both busy and find comfort in having someone to come home to. They traveled in January. They had dinner with friends on weekends. They disagreed about small things, where to spend Thanksgiving, whether to get a dog, and agreed on enough of the larger ones that it felt stable. She had wanted it to be more than stable. She had married him believing it would become more than stable. What she had not anticipated was Nadia. Nadia Alcott was 29 years old, an events coordinator who had worked for a firm that handled some of the Cross family's corporate galas. She was pretty in an obvious way, which is not a criticism, and she was attentive to Beckett, in a way that Mireille had assumed was professional until the February, when she found a receipt in the pocket of Beckett's coat for a hotel in Savannah on a weekend. He had told her he was in Charlotte for work. She did not confront him. She hired someone instead, a woman named Gretchen who had worked financial investigations for 16 years and who came recommended by Mireille's general counsel. Gretchen delivered a report 6 weeks later, 43 pages, photographs, timestamps, a Venmo transaction history that told a cleaner story than Beckett ever had. Mireille read the report on a Sunday morning while Beckett slept. She made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table. She read it twice. Then she put it in the drawer where she kept documents that needed to be dealt with in their own time. She was not ready yet. There were things that needed to be in place first. She had learned, a long time ago, that the moment of truth is only powerful when the ground beneath it is solid. The Meridian portfolio was how Beckett had first come to the Voss Group's attention, or so he believed. In reality, Mireille had structured it that way. The portfolio was a collection of mid-market commercial properties across Georgia and Tennessee, assembled over 3 years by Beckett's team. It was, in fairness, genuinely solid work. Beckett was a competent developer. He understood markets. He had his father's instinct for which neighborhoods were about to shift. Mireille had never denied any of that. But competent work, on its own, does not get you a meeting with the Voss Group. What had gotten Beckett the meeting was a call from the firm's managing director to the Cross family office, expressing interest in a partnership review. That call had been made because Mireille had placed it on the calendar, through appropriate channels, through the managing director who reported to her, though Beckett did not know that, and neither did Harlan. She had done it because she had wanted to see what Beckett would do with an open door. She had watched him walk through it. She had watched him tell his father, watched Harlan weep, actually weep briefly at the kitchen table on a Sunday, watched the family treat it like vindication, like proof that the Cross name meant something to the world outside. She had watched all of it. She had said nothing. She was still deciding. After the dinner, when the dessert plates were cleared and Faye had drifted to the living room with her phone and Dorothea was in the kitchen with the caterers, Harlan found his way to where Mireille stood near the back windows, looking out at the garden. "You were quiet tonight," he said. "I'm often quiet at dinner." "You're always quiet," he said it, the way he always said it, with the particular tone of a man who found quietness in women either suspicious or inconvenient. Harlan had never been subtle about what he valued. Beckett needs a partner who shows up, who engages, who makes people feel like this family is a unit. Mireille turned from the window. "I'm aware of what Beckett needs. Are you?" He set his glass down on the windowsill. "Because I've been watching you for 6 years, Mireille, and what I see is a woman who is present in body and somewhere else entirely in every other way. That's not a partnership, that's a roommate situation." She looked at him for a long moment. "Harlan," she said, "I want to ask you something. Go ahead. What do you know about the Voss Group? About who runs it, who founded it?" He frowned slightly. "Private firm. Founded about 30 years ago. Old Atlanta money behind it, originally. Extremely selective. Why? Do you know the founder's name? There's been some restructuring over the years. The current leadership, the managing director is a man named Ellery. Warren Ellery. Warren reports to the board," Mireille said. "The board reports to the principal. The principal is the person who founded the firm and holds controlling interest." Harlan stared at her. Something was shifting in his face. Not understanding yet, just a kind of alertness, like a man who hears a sound he cannot place. "I'm telling you this," Mireille said, "because you gave a speech tonight about what your family has earned. And I want you to understand something about the word earned before this goes any further." She picked up her water glass from the windowsill and held it the way she had watched Harlan hold his wine, comfortably, like she was in no hurry. "The Voss Group," she said, "is mine." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Harlan's face moved through several expressions in a span of about 4 seconds. Mireille had seen similar progressions before, in boardrooms, in negotiation rooms. Disbelief first, then a kind of reordering. Then, in men like Harlan, something that was not quite anger, but was adjacent to it. The specific discomfort of realizing that the story you have been telling yourself about the shape of the world is missing a wall. "That's not possible," he said. "It's not only possible, it's documented. I can send you the filings if you'd like. My attorneys have them ready." "You've been," he stopped, started again. "For how long?" "I founded the firm at 29. I've held controlling interest since inception. Warren has been managing director for 6 years. He's excellent. I don't involve myself in day-to-day operations. I have other things that occupy my time." She glanced toward the living room, where Beckett's voice was audible now, laughing at something. "Does Beckett?" "No." Harlan sat down, not dramatically, just the way a man sits when his legs decide they're done. He lowered himself into the chair by the window and put his hand over his mouth and looked at her like she was something he had failed to identify correctly for 6 years. "Why?" he said finally. "Why would you?" "Because I wanted to see if the partnership was something the cross-portfolio had earned on its merits," she said. "I asked Warren to evaluate the Meridian portfolio as he would any other submission. No override, no preferential treatment. He came back with a favorable assessment. That's why the partnership moved forward. Not because I handed Beckett something, because the work cleared the bar." She paused. "I want to be clear about that part, because I know how this sounds, and I don't want you to think I built something and then gave it to your family as a gift. I didn't. Beckett's team did real work. It was evaluated on real terms. I simply own the table they were evaluated at." Harlan looked at his hands. "Then why are you telling me now?" It wasn't quite a question, more like a man talking himself through something out loud. "Because I'm leaving Beckett," Mireille said. "And I thought you deserved to understand the full picture before the papers are filed, professionally and personally." Another silence, different shape than the first. "You're leaving him?" "Yes, because of—" "Yes." He didn't push for more. Maybe he already knew. Men like Harlan often knew more than they admitted. They simply chose for long stretches of time to let certain things remain unspoken because speaking them required a response. "The partnership," he said, "the Voss Group partnership, will proceed as documented," Mireille said. "The terms are clean. My personal life has no bearing on the firm's agreements. I would not do that to Beckett's team. They earned it." Harlan looked up at her. There was something in his face she had not seen before, in 6 years of family dinners and holiday photographs, and the long, polite silences of a woman who had never quite fit the mold the Cross family had built for her. It was not respect, exactly. It was something older than respect. The look of a man who realizes, at 64, that he has been profoundly wrong about something and does not know how to hold that. "I misjudged you," he said. "Yes," Mireille said. "You did," she told Beckett that same night, not at the estate. She waited until they were home, until Beckett had loosened his tie and poured himself a drink and settled into the couch, with the particular ease of a man who believed the evening had gone well. "I need to talk to you," she said. He looked up, something in her voice. He set the glass down. She told him about the Voss Group first, watching his face the way she had watched Harlan's. The disbelief, the reordering, but different. With Harlan there had been a kind of reckoning. With Beckett there was something more like vertigo, like the floor had shifted and he was still trying to find his footing. "You," he stopped. "Mireille, are you saying that?" "Yes. Since before we met." "Yes." He stood up, sat back down. "And you never told me. You never asked." That landed differently than she expected it to. She had not said it to wound him. It was simply true. He had never asked. Not what firm she worked with. Not who her clients were. Not what her day-to-day looked like. He had accepted her answer of finance for 6 years the way you accept background noise. Present acknowledged, not investigated. She watched the truth of that settle over him. "I want to be fair," she said. "I didn't hide it to deceive you. I've structured my involvement in the firm privately for years, for professional reasons that have nothing to do with you, but I also didn't volunteer it. And I've thought about what that means, what I was protecting myself from, by keeping that wall up." She paused. "I think I already knew on some level that you weren't asking, and I think part of me used that as a reason not to offer." Beckett looked at her for a long time without speaking. "Is that the only reason you're saying this now?" he said. "Because of the firm?" "No." She reached into her bag. She set Gretchen's report on the coffee table between them. She did not open it. She did not need to. Beckett looked at it. He looked at her. "Mireille, I'm not here for an apology," she said. Her voice was even. She had practiced this in her own way, not rehearsed the words, but settled herself into a place where they could be said without breaking. "I'm not here for an explanation. I know what's in that report. I don't need you to confirm it. I've had months to sit with this, and what I've arrived at is very simple." She stood. "I don't want this anymore. I wanted it to be something it wasn't. That's not your fault entirely, but it's not something I'm interested in continuing." "You waited," Beckett said. "You knew months ago. You sat through all of it. The dinners, the partnership announcement. Tonight, I needed things to be in order." "What things?" "My attorneys will be in touch Monday morning. The terms I'm proposing are straightforward. I'm not interested in making this difficult." Beckett was quiet for a long moment. She could see him running through it, the way a person does when the map they've been using turns out to be the wrong map entirely. "The partnership," he said. "Stands," she said. "As I told your father, the agreement is between the Voss Group and the Cross portfolio. It's clean. It will remain clean, you told my father, tonight, before I told you. I wanted him to have time to process before the papers are filed." Something crossed Beckett's face at that. Not anger exactly. the particular expression of a man who realizes that the order of operations has already been decided, and he has been the last to know. He must have. Beckett stopped. What did he say? That he had misjudged me. Beckett looked at the report on the coffee table. He looked at her, and in the long silence that followed, in the living room of the house they had shared for 4 years, she watched something in him quiet down. Not collapse, not break, just go still, the way things go still when they're finally over. I'm sorry, he said, for what I did. I know, she said. She picked up the report from the coffee table. She tucked it back into her bag. She had everything she needed. She had had it for months. The attorneys filed on Monday, as she had said. The process was, by the standards of these things, uncomplicated. She had been careful. She had built her life with a structural awareness of what she wanted to be hers and what she was willing to share, and the documents reflected that. There were no surprises. Beckett did not contest. Harlan called her on the Wednesday after the filing. She almost didn't answer. Then she did. I owe you an apology, he said. Several, if I'm being honest. For tonight. For the past 6 years. For the way He stopped. I talked about you like you were furniture. I talked about what Beckett needed from you, what this family needed from you, and I never once. Another stop. I never once thought about what you might have brought to this that I couldn't see. Marel sat with that for a moment. I appreciate that, Harlan. The partnership, he said. I spoke to Warrens this morning. I want you to know that we intend to honor every term. We're not going to. I know you won't, she said. I wasn't worried about that. A pause. You should have been in that room, he said. The way I could talk to the Voss group tonight, about what it meant to get that seat. You should have said, what would I have said? He had no answer for that. She hadn't expected one. Thank you for calling, Harlan, she said. She hung up. There is a version of this story where Mirey Fontaine-Cross spent those months in quiet suffering, where the silence was grief, and the careful preparation was a kind of coping, and the sitting through dinners and toasts and speeches was endurance dressed up as strategy. That version exists. She would not pretend it doesn't. She had loved Beckett in the way of a woman who chooses carefully and then commits fully, and then watches that commitment become something it was never going to be. That kind of love doesn't disappear cleanly. It leaves residue. It leaves the particular ache of a person who did the right things in the wrong story. But there is also the other part of it, the part that is harder to explain, and that she has only said aloud to Elowen, her oldest friend and the person she called the morning after the dinner, sitting in the parking lot of a Whole Foods on Peachtree, because she hadn't wanted to be inside the house when she said it. I'm not sad, she told Elowen. I thought I would be. I've been preparing to be sad for months, and I'm just not. Elowen, who had known Mirey since they were 22 and sharing a one-bedroom in Buckhead, was quiet for a moment on the other end of the line. What are you? She asked. Mirey looked out the windshield at the parking lot. A woman was loading groceries into a Subaru. 2 men were arguing, not loudly, about which entrance to use. A kid on a scooter was weaving between parked cars with the specific fearlessness of someone who has not yet been hurt by anything. I'm ready, Mirey said. She didn't mean for anything in particular. She just meant for what was next. For the version of her life that did not require explaining herself in pieces to a man who never thought to ask. For mornings where her first thought wasn't strategy. For dinners where she could sit at the right end of the table. She had been quiet for a long time. Not because she was weak. Not because she had nothing to say. But because she had learned that some truths are only worth speaking when the room is ready to hear them. And you have to be the one who decides when that is. Harlan's voice, the night of the dinner, came back to her sometimes in the weeks after. I misjudged you. 3 words, 6 years late. She did not feel triumph when she remembered it. She did not feel vindicated in the way people imagine vindication feels when they picture a moment like that one. She felt mostly clear. That was enough. It was she had decided more than enough. She filed the last of the documents on a Friday afternoon in November. She signed her name on the line, her full name, Mirey Fontaine-Cross, though it would be Mirey Fontaine again soon, and handed the pen back to her attorney, who was a precise woman named Theodora, who had handled Mirel's legal work for 9 years, and who said nothing because she knew Mirel didn't need her to say anything. Outside, the November light was low and gold, the kind of Atlanta afternoon that looks like a photograph of itself. Mirel sat in her car in the parking structure for 4 minutes, not doing anything in particular, not crying, not on the phone. Just sitting with the fact that it was done. Then she started the car, and she drove back toward the city. And the skyline came up the way it always did on that stretch of highway, sudden and bright against the late afternoon, and she thought about the meeting she had at 9 the next morning, and the call she needed to return to Warren, and the dinner she had promised Elowen, and all the ordinary forward motion of a life that was, finally, entirely her own. quietness she had always known was not weakness. It was patience. It was precision. It was knowing very clearly when the moment had arrived and being ready when it did.